Should be coming in now. And we are recording. Welcome everyone who are coming into the room. I'll start in just a moment. And Jacob, I will be doing my best to monitor the chat and the questions. And for all of you who are just joining us, we will have time at the end of this hour for questions. In the meantime, feel free to use the chat. Feel free to introduce yourself. If you have any questions you want to put in, you're welcome to as we go. We're going to give it just another minute. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today. This is session 2 of our 4-part Project Wild Earth Month webinar series. Each Wednesday of this month, we have invited one of our AFWA, that is the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, AFWA, one of our staff members to present on the area of specialty that they represent, and also to discuss, as I will discuss with you all, how that connects to our efforts in conservation education and the Project Wild program. And today we're delighted to have Jacob Blandford join us. Jacob is the Climate Adaptation Manager with the association, and he's going to speak to us today about win-win solutions. This meeting is being recorded. That recording will be available sometime in the coming week. We will send out that announcement when it is, so you should receive that in your email box. It will also be linked up under the Project Wild landing page, projectwild.org. If you scroll down to the What's New section, you can find the links that way. And before, Jacob, I turn it over to you, I'm going to share my screen and introduce folks to those who might not be familiar with the Project Wild program. Okay, and Jacob, if you could give me a thumbs up on the shared screen, do you see it all right? Okay, all right. So Project Wild is a cross-curricular environmental education program for educators who serve audiences pre-kindergarten through 12th grade, frequently used at the college level too. So really it's pre-K through grade 16. We have various subdivisions of the Project Wild program, including Aquatic Wild, Flying Wild, our early childhood program, Growing Up Wild. And we also are beginning to publish modules that are smaller than the traditional large books of activities, our activity guides, such as the Project Wild Climate and Wildlife module. These materials are available a couple of ways. One way to get the main modules, the main curriculum guides, is to attend Project Wild professional development training. And you can learn about those at projectwild.org, or you can contact your state Project Wild coordinator to find about opportunities to participate in Project Wild professional development in your state. And we also offer online professional development. And again, if you go to www.projectwild.org, you'll find links up to take online professional development. Okay, and I'll come back and talk more about Project Wild later as time allows, but for now, Jacob, take it away.
Thank you, Mark, and hello, everyone. Just give me a second. I'll share my screen. You might have to, yeah, there we go. Yeah, so I'll be talking about nature-based solutions, which are kind of win-win opportunities for people and nature. It's particularly kind of within the realm of climate change and addressing climate change for fish and wildlife and our natural resources. So I just want to kind of do some definitions first, just to kind of clear some things up so we're all working, from the same starting point. And so when we're talking about addressing climate change, there's really kind of two different aspects of it. One is climate change mitigation, which is represented here on the left, and that is efforts to reduce or stop climate change by removing greenhouse gases from the atmosphere or by reducing the amount of greenhouse gases being emitted into the atmosphere. And so a lot of that is done through like renewable energy, such as wind or solar. A quick plug: later this month, one of the webinars will be on wind development and energy in wildlife. So you'll learn more about that later, or solar, as well as planting trees, which through photosynthesis take up CO2 for growth, sequestering it away, taking it out of the atmosphere. The other aspect of addressing climate change is climate change adaptation. And that recognizes that climate change is happening. It already happened. It's not a future problem to deal with. It's a current problem. And so through climate change adaptation, what we're doing is changing our approach to conservation or management of fish and wildlife in an effort to address the climate change impacts on fish and wildlife. And when we think about climate change, everywhere is going to be different. So some places like out west, it's a drought. It's getting hotter and drier. Some places are, getting more rain than before. They're not in a drought. They're getting increased precipitation and extreme weather events. Some places are getting hotter and wetter. So everywhere is a little bit different. And so, solutions are place-based, and I'm going to try to highlight a few different ones from around the nation that hopefully applies something you might be a little bit familiar with. And so nature-based solutions, it's a bit of a buzzword and a hot topic. If you do a Google News search, you'll get all sorts of articles with the term nature-based solution in the title. The Biden-Harris administration announced nature-based solutions. The federal government put out a nature-based solutions resource guide. So, I mean, it really is something that's a hot button item these days. And essentially, the top block of text here is the real long technical definition of it. But simply, it's nature-based solutions are using the services provided by nature to solve human problems, but in a way that people and nature benefit. That's the key part. And I'm talking about them in the sense of climate change, but as you can see from this detailed definition, there's nature-based solutions for human health or for food and water security or disaster risk reduction. A lot of them overlap, but it's not just climate change that you could have a nature-based solution for. And so just to kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about before I dive into more examples, is my background is kind of in coastal ecology and restoration. And so this is a pretty standard one, is that in a coastal environment where the coastal habitat is eroding, you could build a seawall, and that would protect the coast. It would stop erosion, but you wouldn't have any benefits to people, or I'm sorry, to wildlife. It's a benefit to people, not a benefit to nature. And so a nature-based solution would be this like living shoreline where you actually restore the marsh habitat or some coastal habitats to protect the shoreline from erosion. And when you do a nature-based solution, as this image kind of demonstrates, there's lots of wildlife and animals that benefit from it. So I'll start with one of my favorite nature-based solutions, probably because you can eat it, but one I think is just really cool, and that's oysters. And so on the left is what oysters will look like in the wild. They kind of look like flat rocks. And on the right is might be what you're more familiar with, which is them served on the half shell in your local seafood restaurant. And that's one reason why, humans like oysters so much. But just,
Jacob?
quick, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I think the view we're seeing is one slide behind where you are.
Huh.
I think you might have what I'm seeing now is still the retaining wall and the living shoreline. And it might be that you have the view that gives you both slides.
I don't have that view. Are you seeing the oyster slide now?
Okay, no, I'm okay. So yes, apparently it's
Hello?
it's user error on my part because everyone else is seeing the oyster. So you just keep going ahead, and sorry for the
Okay.
interruption.
No, I'm glad. I want to make sure everyone's seeing the right
Okay.
thing or it won't make sense. So just a little, basic background on oysters. They're bivalves like clams or mussels. Individual oysters grow together, forming a reef. That's important. I'll get to that. And they're filter feeders. So they can filter up to 50 gallons of water per day. A single oyster can do that. And that's how they get their food. They suck in water, they filter out the particles that are in there, they eat it, and they spit out clean water. And so these oysters that form reefs are referred to as ecosystem engineers. Just by doing what they do, by an oyster being an oyster, it builds habitat. So you've got the oyster, which is a living animal, and then they form these reefs, which are habitat. So they're referred to as ecosystem engineers. And I've already highlighted some of the great things oyster reefs do, like they provide us food, but they also provide food to other animals. Like this reddish crab here is a stone crab. So it eats baby oysters. And then in return, we harvest and eat stone crabs. I mentioned that they're filter feeders. So this picture here in the middle is 2 tanks filled with the same water. And in one, they put oysters, and in one, they don't have oysters. And you can see that given time, the oysters filter the water. Oyster reefs create habitat like for fish and crabs where these aquatic species live on the oyster reefs. But oysters reefs are intertidal, so at low tide, even terrestrial animals or birds, raccoons, otters, they go out and forage on reefs. These reefs form large structures in the water. And so what they can do is attenuate wave energy. They absorb the wave energy and make the water calmer, which can be used to protect shorelines. They can help, the shells are made from calcium carbonate, so they actually can absorb carbon, sequester carbon, which is a mitigation strategy. And they also, by filtering water, as well as they have all these little small spaces where bacteria live, and they remove nitrogen from the water. So they can improve water quality that way. So what I just mentioned is referred to as ecosystem services. This is, the oysters have inherent value just because they're a living thing, but they also have value to provide these ecosystem services to people. And that is why what we value in nature, in addition to just the inherent value, is what nature does to us. And when it comes to conservation or management, it's these ecosystem services that are also are leveraged to justify the funding that we use to manage and conserve and restore them. So these ecosystem services are very important. And when you think about all these ecosystem services, and if we leverage them properly, then oysters are a nature-based solution to increase resilience to climate change. So what you're looking at here is an oyster reef. It's a restored oyster reef in Mobile Bay. On the left side is open water, and you can see how choppy, how much energy it has. And on the right side, behind the reefs, you can see how calm it is. And so with climate change, sea levels are going to rise. Sea levels are rising, storm events are going to become more severe, and not just hurricanes like the big storms that get named in front of TV, but just standard everyday storms get more intense. And so we can use oysters, and they're just ability to create reefs and the ecosystem service they provide to help protect shorelines from climate change. What I mean is protect erosion. So what you're seeing here is a wildlife refuge that's being protected. If all of it eroded, we'd lose a lot of habitat for all the different animals that live there and all of the other ecosystem services they provide. But you can also do oyster reef restoration in front of a hurricane evacuation route and protect that road from erosion and coastal storms. A lot of airports are located on the coast, so you could restore areas around the airport and protect them from storms and some climate change impacts. And so this is just one of the great example of oysters as a nature-based solution where they are solving a human problem, the problem being we're losing land, and humans and nature benefits by using this solution. Another is beavers. Beavers are rodents like mice or squirrels or rabbits. They're herbivores. They live in the water or they're semi-aquatic, but they don't eat fish, they eat plant material. And they live in hardwood riparian areas. So hardwood refers to the forests, like oak, maple, birch, not necessarily pine trees. Those are considered a softwood. And riparian is referring to rivers and streams. So like a riverbank is a riparian area. I think they're cute. Also, I didn't put that on here, but that's another one. Beavers are ecosystem engineers. You might start seeing a pattern here. A beaver, just by being a beaver, actually builds habitat. They create dams, they dam streams, which creates a pond, and that pond provides habitat to a whole suite of animals, fish, amphibians, birds, insects, all of it. And so beavers, one of the first ecosystem services they provided us, and this was way before we even were calling things ecosystem services, was hats. It was their fur. It inspired and motivated a lot of European colonization of the Americas. I just read about the Lewis and Clark expedition, and they're kind of considered the first explorers of the West, and they opened up the West. But when they got out there, thousands of miles from the U.S. states at that time, out into like the Dakotas and Montana, they were still running into European beaver trappers. So they provided us with furs for a long time. They also were eaten, but furs were the main thing they provided to us. But we also now recognize the other ecosystem services they provide. So I mentioned they build ponds, and those ponds support all sorts of wildlife. The ponds also keep water on the land. They slow down water. So as it comes down the stream, it hits a dam, it slows down, it stays there. And so what that can do is then infiltrate down into the ground. It can fill aquifers, like where we get our drinking water from. It can help reduce flooding, the impacts of flooding by slowing it down. As heavy rains come and they make their way to a stream or river, they'll come rushing down and they'll run into one of these ponds and they'll slow down. And that just helps reduce the impacts of the flood. It's still a flood, it'll still move downstream, but just at a slower rate. I mentioned they provide, habitat for a large range of wildlife, but I highlight here waterfowl like ducks. Ducks are a real important species or group of species for the recreational opportunities they bring. They're a popular species to hunt, and people really like hunting, so there's benefits for that. But they're also just real popular with bird watchers. So even just getting out and viewing wildlife, people benefit by having these beaver dams. Beaver dams can create deep water, which is important because that means the top, with climate change and temperatures getting warmer, water gets warmer. But with a beaver dam and it's deeper water, that means the bottom remains cold. And that's important for species like salmon and trout. Again, popular species for fishing, recreational fishing. People love to catch them and eat them, but also just real important for the habitat and the ecosystem. They help improve water quality by catching sediment. So as the sediment will come down and get stuck behind the dam. So on the Upstream of the dam, you'll have more sediment, and downstream of it, you get clear water with no sediment, which is important for a lot of aquatic species like salamanders, like hellbenders or mud puppies, or that require clear, fast-moving water with rocky bottoms. If there weren't for the beaver dams, all that sediment would move downstream, cover up those rocks, and it wouldn't be great habitat for salamanders. And then, they also help sequester carbon, so removing carbon from the atmosphere through vegetation growth and depositing it in the sediments of these ponds, which then remain in place. So leveraging all of these ecosystem services, beavers are nature-based solutions to increase the resilience to climate change. So what you're seeing here is following the wildfires out west. This is a scorched forest, except for the middle. There's this oasis of green. This is a wetland created by a beaver dam. And so this is just one beaver, but if you think that if we can get, beavers back on the landscape, and they would create a series of these, creating all these refuges that would help prevent the spread of fire. It would keep water on the land. So during those droughts and those extreme heat periods, even if it's less rain that falls, the beaver dams slow it down. They keep it on the landscape to help prevent these extreme large wildfires. There was a story a few years ago about a woman, and she had a beaver dam built on her property, and it was starting to flood the property. And this happens a lot. And so, a lot of there's private companies or even state agencies will come and remove the beaver. And before they were able to come remove the beaver, there was a wildfire, and you went up, the wildfire went right to that beaver dam and stopped, and it saved her house. And so after that, she didn't get the beaver removed. She actually, recognized the benefits of having it there. And so, that's just a great example of how they can help build our resilience to climate change. The next one I want to talk about is flowers and native plants in general, but I really like flowers, and it's not something a lot of people think of as like an important ecosystem or habitat. We think of them as being pretty and putting them on a vase, or we put them in weddings. We use them a lot as decoration. The flower is the reproductive part of the plant that's producing fruits and seeds. And the flower, it's attractive and encourages pollination and provides food to a lot of animals. And so, but it goes beyond that. I think sunflower seeds are probably a great example of some of the food we get from flowers. But you go to fancy restaurants, and there's lots of edible flowers now on things, and flowers themselves are eaten by like bees. The pollinators, most of them are accidentally pollinating. They're there to eat nectar or eat part of the flower, and while they do that, the pollen sticks to them and they transfer it. Having healthy wildflowers and native plants actually helps reduce pests like insect pests like mosquitoes or aphids. You support ladybugs that eat aphids, and anyone that's a gardener, you're trying to do anything you can to prevent aphids from getting into your garden. So for instance, I have a community garden plot, and half of it I do in vegetables, and the other half I plant in native wildflowers to provide a pollinator garden. But I like the benefits of having the dragonflies and the praying mantises and the ladybugs there that are going to eat the pests, eat the insects that I think are pests. I like this picture of the flower providing just a little bit of shade for the lizard, and it's kind of funny, but it's very true. There's the shade, especially as temperatures rise, shade provided by these plants is very important ecosystem service. We enjoy going to a park and eating a picnic under the shade of a tree. Animals do the same. There's research done out west in California during the droughts that's been going on for the last 20 years. And what they found is that even in the drought, in the deserts where there is still plants that can provide shade in what's referred to as microclimates, it's this 1 foot by 1 foot shaded area, which is 10 degrees cooler than the surrounding area. Those little spots allow small mammals and birds to survive. And the animals that their natural behavior was to find shade was able to had a higher abundance because of just the very small little pockets of shade that are provided. similar to beavers, wildflower meadows and grasslands help keep water on the landscape. As it lands and it starts flowing, just the physical barrier of all the flowers, all the stems and leaves slow down water and prevent it from moving as quickly. And also the roots help it absorb into the ground. The water just follows down and funnels down the roots into the water into the ground. And then of course they're plants, so they're sequestering carbon. They're storing it in their roots. The roots get buried, that carbon gets locked up into the soil. And so they're very important again for that. And so wildflowers are a nature-based solution to increase resilience to climate change. And so they're more than just pretty flowers. They're doing a lot to help us, and help us combat climate change, and they're doing a lot to support wildlife and biodiversity. And so there's this concept in nature, biomimicry, where one organism will mimic another one to take advantage of some of the benefits of being that organism. A popular one is this caterpillar, which on the top looks a lot like this snake. And so if a bird hesitates thinking this caterpillar is a snake, that's just enough time for that caterpillar to wiggle away and be safe, or the bird knows not to mess with it. And so we do that also with these nature-based solutions. Oysters and beavers are wild animals. They do what they want. No matter how much we try to manipulate them, they might not be where we want them to be. And so we recognize, though, that even if the oyster reef's not where we want it to be, we still want those ecosystem services. And so one thing we do is artificial oyster reefs. So there aren't a lot of large wild oyster reefs anymore due to a whole bunch of reasons. We harvest them. We used to over harvest them. We used to use them to build roads. Due to water quality and reduced habitat, we don't have as many, and so we aren't necessarily getting those ecosystem services that we want. So we mimic oysters by creating artificial reefs, and these come in all shapes and sizes, from metal frames that are filled with rock or shell, to concrete balls, to just oyster shelves themselves. They're not living oysters, they're just the shells. There'll be communities, all the seafood restaurants will get together, and they'll, rather than throwing away the oyster shells, they'll work with a nonprofit or another organization to keep them, and when they have millions of shells, they'll go out and put them back into the water and create artificial oyster reefs. There's these concrete blocks, the oyster castles. They're kind of like Legos that just stack together and allow you to build oyster reefs. And you can see from these pictures that they kind of provide these complex habitats, all these nooks and crannies for wildlife to live in and forage in. They create physical structure, which reduces wave energy. And so we can still get some, if not all, of the ecosystem services out of these nature-based solutions, by mimicking the natural organisms. We do it with beaver dam analogs. And so this is just, people going out and doing a similar process. You could argue a beaver is a better engineer because they don't have to drive stakes into the ground. But in order for us to mimic a beaver dam, we drive these stakes into the ground and then use branches and mud to fill in. And this gives us the ability to put the beaver dam where we want it, where we think it will be most useful and beneficial. It also allows us to control the height of the beaver dam, so we can decide exactly the level and the size of the pond. But we recognize that these ecosystem services and these nature-based solutions are so beneficial for us. We're doing everything we can to mimic them. And so the quick takeaway that I want you to take away from this, I guess, is that nature-based solutions solve human problems while benefiting people and nature. That's the key. We obviously want to help ourselves, but we want to do it in a way that's not like the seawall where you destroy nature. You want to solve our problem while benefiting nature. And so, Mark, that is everything I have. I can pass it over to you now.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. Yeah, so
Yeah.
if you could stop sharing your screen and I'll start sharing mine. Okay, so I wanted to take some time to connect this to our education efforts. We do have a wide variety of people participating in this webinar. Many educators, also professionals in wildlife management, and many of you wear both those hats. So most of you are probably familiar with Project Wild already, but I'm going to talk especially about Project Wild. And let me get my, hold on, bear with me just a moment. Okay, so, and Jacob, if you give me a thumbs up for the shared screen, okay, I always want to double check. A recent development in the Project Wild program has been the effort to produce modules, activity modules that are basically collections of different Project Wild activities. And this is our first one in many years, but it's the Project Wild Climate and Wildlife module. It contains activities from the Project Wild K through 12 curriculum and activity guide, as well as one from Aquatic Wild and Flying Wild, our migratory bird education curriculum. And so this one I mentioned because it particularly is focused on many aspects of teaching about climate change and climate adaptation. And there are a few activities I think that really lend themselves to learning and discussing these ideas about using nature, working with nature to help solve problems, to help benefit people and wildlife and ecosystems. One of those activities is Lights Out. And Lights Out is, and it ranges from upper elementary to high school, but the basic premise is students are conducting a light audit at their school. And that involves researching, what is the problem with light pollution? How does it affect wildlife? How does it affect wildlife species in their area and at their school site? What kind of lighting do they have? And at what hours are the lights on? Are they on all night? Is that necessary? How much lighting is necessary? So all sorts of questions about light pollution and the types of light pollution. And then ultimately, how they can help reduce light pollution at their school and in their community. And so reducing light pollution, of course, is beneficial for various reasons, but it's one easy way to work with nature and help bring habitats back to nocturnal species that may not find what they need in terms of food or shelter when there is excessive light pollution. And then another activity here on the right side is Habitat Heroes. And Habitat Heroes is an interesting environmental education activity within a much larger collection of activities and projects that involve habitat restoration. Habitat Heroes is really a basic framework for how to organize, how students can organize with an educator or a mentor, how to organize about starting a habitat project. And so it can be very well tailored to a local community, and it's another opportunity to think about those ecosystem services that species provide, say, at a school site, and what can be done at a school site to enhance those ecosystem services that may have been lost through development in the past. So those were two activities, and I'll back up a moment, two activities published in the Climate and Wildlife module. Those two activities came directly from the Project Wild curriculum and activity guide. And so there are many other activities in the guide that involve those holistic approaches to looking at environmental challenges, looking at the ecosystem and habitat, looking at social, economic, and political concerns, and oftentimes involving simulations on how to work together with people to address those concerns. And so one example of that is the activity Ecosystem Architects. In this activity, and I'm just reading from the method here, but the students simulate the restoration of a healthy, sustainable ecosystem on the site of an abandoned shopping center or an island in a river corridor within an urban area. And students share their ecosystems design, comparing and contrasting the two types of systems and the influencing factors on these systems. So again, it's looking at a very holistic picture of a hypothetical site in this case, although the activity can certainly be applied to a site, a real site of, how students might go about redesigning the site to be better stewards of an ecosystem. And then jumping down in grade levels to the early or the lower elementary, and for Project Wild, that means kindergarten, first and second grade, but as well as the upper elementary, 3 through 5th. So great activity for elementary students, busy bees, busy blooms. And of course, there the emphasis is on the process of pollination. And so that's a great connection for ecosystem services for elementary grades. In this case, the students are simulating being a bee and using various kinds of prompts or materials such as sticky notes. How many sticky notes or pollen granules can they attach to themselves from a flower? And then Bat Blitz for upper elementary and middle school, students simulate the activity of bats who are feeding and trying to survive, and so what affects bat populations, what are the limiting factors of bat populations, and what are some of concerns for bat conservation, including white nose syndrome. And of course, bringing it full circle, what can we do to help bat populations? And so if you'd like to learn more about these activities or Project Wild professional development, which is how typically these activities are acquired through those curriculum guides, the Project Wild professional development training is offered throughout the United States. And if you go to www.projectwild.org, this is the landing page. It actually reroutes you to the larger part of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies website. But here on the Project Wild landing page, you'll see in this second bar down, the Get Training link. And so that will help you connect with the Project Wild coordinator in your state. Okay, so we're gonna have time now for some questions, comments, ideas to share. I want to make sure though not to forget, so I'm gonna jump ahead in a second and come back to the questions, but I'm hoping that you all will join us next week. And if you haven't yet registered, you of course still can, because next Wednesday on April 19th, the association's own Dr. Megan Gade, who is the Energy and Wildlife Program Manager, she will be discussing renewable energy development and implications for wildlife conservation. And we'll also be connecting that to conservation education and Project Wild activities. And again, to register, www.projectwild.org, scroll down to the bottom under What's New, and you'll find the link to the registration page. It's also where we're linking up the recordings of these webinars as well. Okay, so let's back up and see if we have any questions. And I haven't looked at the chat in about 10 minutes, so I'm doing that now.
There are a couple questions submitted ahead of time that I'll just touch base on first before on researching the chat. And so The first one asks about kind of recommendations to students about, this career path. And I love this question because I think one of the unique things about working in environmental conservation, fish and wildlife management, however you want to describe it, is that you can you don't have to be a biologist. I think it's one of the few fields where if you really like numbers and math and finances, you can be an accountant. Every agency, every organization has an accountant. If you like law and policy, you can be a lawyer. Every agency, every organization has a legal team. Um, if you like communications and marketing or graphic design, you can go do that. And then every agency, every organization has a communications department. And I actually, my background's in biology. I think I'd be better at my job if I had communications and marketing background. I mean, so that's I think we all in this field love animals to some degree. You don't have to be a biologist or even a scientist of any kind to do it. And so that's always my, advice for students that are interested in this is go do whatever your interest is and then come back and bring that back to wildlife and conservation. We need those skills. So that's it. There's endless possibilities. There's no one route to get here.
Jacob, if I may jump in and put in a related plug once again for Project Wild.
Yep.
One good strategy for exploring careers with students, or you can even use these resources to steer students towards and have them do the work. If you go to, have I mentioned the Project Wild website yet? www.projectwild.org, and you dig around a bit and look at the resources for each activity. Every activity in the Project Wild K-12 guide, we call it the terrestrial guide, or the aquatic wild guide, every one of those activities has a link for wild work. And it'll take you to a site that has an online place where there's links to all sorts of career resources, particularly videos, profiles of various careers in wildlife management. And when we were building all of these links, we started researching all of these careers, and typically, especially like in a large state, a wildlife agency will have over 100 different kinds of careers just within the agency. My background is in education and geography. It so happens that my wife is an architect. She works for a state wildlife agency and is in construction management. And she didn't get into that profession thinking she was going to work for a wildlife agency, but eventually the shared mission of the wildlife agency and the state park service appealed to her. And so to help support and share the passion for wildlife conservation and the environment, any profession is a good way, or most any profession is a good way to get in on that effort.
Yeah, I think the most unique one I worked with is a realtor, and his job was to identify properties that could be bought and put under conservation, and then deal with all of the bank documents and the closing costs and those closing documents. I mean, similar to when you buy a house or a property for your own personal living. I mean, same for when a state agency or a nonprofit wants to purchase property and put it under conservation. So limitless options.
Well, Jacob, was there another question or two that you got in advance?
The other question that was submitted was just kind of what can you do in your home and yard to improve or increase habitat with climate change. And there's kind of two blanket statements that will benefit you regardless of where you're at, is that's native species. Like whatever, no offense, your Japanese maple might look good, but just plant a native maple tree, or plant native flowers. The native wildlife knows to eat them and how to eat them. If that's what you're going for. And the second one is just reduce the amount of yard you're mowing. Manicured grass is not great for wildlife. You're usually burning gasoline to mow it, and you're putting fertilizers or chemicals on it. And so, um, obviously you got to work within a homeowners association and within your city ordinances. But as much native plant material as you can have, that's a benefit. And also, some things you don't think about, your wood fire pile provides great habitat for lizards and bugs to live in. So I mean, there's all sorts of things that you might not necessarily think of as habitat are habitat. And so those are just, plant native plants, you'll go a long way. Let the animals eat your native plants. Don't feed the animals. That'll go a long way in helping, benefit the local wildlife in your yard.
Okay, well, Jacob, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. So if you have another question, keep on going.
Those were the ones that were submitted. There were a couple others submitted, but they're outside my wheelhouse. I'm not even gonna try to answer them.
Okay. Sorry, I don't have the questions in front of me, but if they relate to conservation education, I might be able to help.
No, they're kind of about deer management, so and other things along those lines. So
okay. All right. All
Yeah.
right. Well, we'll be ending a bit early. I'm going to stay on, and if anyone does have questions, you can type them in. This being a webinar format, it's not set so you can turn your mic on, but I will be watching the chat and give it at least a few more minutes. So otherwise, thank you for your attendance. Stay tuned for the recording and hope to see you next week. Jacob, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you all for attending. I appreciate your time today.
And I see Sandy had the comment, can we get this recording? And yes, I will be sending out an email to all participants sometime, probably later this week, possibly early next week. And it will have the link. It will be linked up to a YouTube channel, and the link will also be accessible at our website, projectwild.org. You have to go to our landing page and scroll down to what's new, and you'll see the link to this recording series, this webinar series. So we'll have this recording, we have last week's recording, and we'll have recordings for the next 2 weeks as well. Okay, folks, well, I'm going to go ahead and end it now. Thank you again.